I just wanted to take care of a few things I left out. I'm not going to take all. I know the things that I left out that I'm not going to speak about, but let's do what we're going to do. There's an interesting Reb Chaim, and what I'd like to do is to point out that as brilliant as it sounds, it goes against the grain of everything here in Sefer Mitzvos. And let's see. If you recall, Tiglachas Rishona is not named as a separate mitzvah. And Tiglachas Shnia in Mitzvah is nimnes. Okay? Now, if you recall also, the Rambam clearly says over here in Kufir Aleph that the reason why Tiglachas Mitzvah and the Korbanos Mitzvah of Mechus Kippurim are separate mitzvahs because the Tiglachas is doing one thing. Tiglachas is mitaher the mitzvah from being tomei like a sheret, and the Korbanos Mechus Kippurim is a different issue of ta'ara. Whereas in Nazir, the Tiglachas and the Korbanos are the same purpose, and timat to the Nazir yayin, and therefore it's one mitzvah. Okay, that is the assumption the Ram clearly is working with here in Minyan Mitzvahs. Is the Gram Halevi asked his father Reb Chaim, the Rambam in Perek Yud of Hilchos Naziris Halacha Aleph, Misha Noza Shona Achas v'hoye b'chol Ashona Hazois Safek Mitzvah v'Safek Tomei Meis. But the Rambam is dealing with a very strange case where you're involved with Nazir and Mitzvah and Tomei Meis, and the shaila is how you mekayim Naziris. So the Rambam says, Harei ze moine shiva yomim umaze b'shlishi u'shvi'i ve'eno megalech b'shvi'i. So he's not megalech b'shvi'i. So the question is, how does he become tall? So the conclusion is that the Tiglachas is not makiv in the Ta'ara. And this is like our Gisa, there are some, we'll see, that claim it's the Torah Sefer, the Rambam Perek Yud Aleph, Mehilchos Tumas Saras, Halacha Dalet, Tiglachas HaMitzvah, Utfilosa, V'azoso, Einon Ma'akve Zeh Ezeh, V'shar Kol HaMaisa Ma'akve. So Lechem Mishnah seems to accept the Gisa in Hilchos Tumas Saras, and the Lechem Mishnah in Naziris, Hilchos Naziris Perek Yud Halacha Tes. So they asked, Moshe Yosef Chaim, is the Chamafuisha Mishnah in Nazir and Memdal Beis that Tiglachas is ma'akev in the Taharas HaMitzvah. So how then? And it says, U'mitzvah Taharasei Tluya b'Tiglachasei. So how could the Ram do this? So Rav Moshe says, in the name of his father Reb Chaim, the difference between Tiglachas Rishona and Tiglachas Shnia. That Tiglachas Rishona is a chelik of the Taharas HaMitzvah, and that the Ram clearly says in Shiur Yud Aleph, and is Metayer the Mitzvah from Tumas Mishkav and Bia, but he's not Nita from Tumas Sheret. until he's ngaleach tiglachas rishona. I mean, he's not nita from the tumor of Mishkav Moshe Bia until tiglachas rishona. But the tiglachas shniya is not necessary for tahara from tumor sheretz, and it can be taught from tumor sheretz even without the tiglachas shniya. And he says the tiglachas shniya is only necessary for avodas karbonos, because even if he's does tefillah at the end of the 7 days, but he doesn't do tiglachas, he can't bring his karbonos until tiglachas. So it comes out tiglachas rishona is a chelik of his tahara, and tiglachas shniya is not a chelik of his tahara. And what the Mishnah says that tiglachas is ma'akev b'tayis mitzera is referring to tiglachas rishona. That's what Chaim says. You understand yourself, this is diametrically opposed to everything he says over here. The Rambam says in Kuf Yud Aleph that the reason why tiglachas shniya is a separate mitzvah, because the whole purpose of the tiglachas is to metaye him from tumor sheretz. It has nothing to do with the korban. And according to Rab Chaim, it's largely just the opposite. And we'll pick this up soon, but this is where we're coming from. Okay? So again, the reason why the Rambam says over here in Sefer Hamitzvos that tiglachas shniya is a separate mitzvah minyan Hamitzvos is because the tiglachas is bo l'taher, him from tumor sheretz, and it's nothing to do with the akovas karbonos of the Mechus Kippurim of Mitzera. Whereas Rab Chaim says the tiglachas shniya is not mitayer from tumor sheretz, it's a tefillah, and the tiglachas shniya is only machshir that he should be able to bring the karbonos, which again is diametrically opposed to everything he's saying. So good. So you can say maybe the Ram Mishnah Torah was chayzer, Rab Chaim saying pshat, and the Ram Mishnah Torah. That's certainly a way that you can go. And it's clear, because that's the Rambam says right over here. He says, "Ubishishi mimidziris in Kuf Yud Aleph, Omru ma bein nozir." It's Perek Vov Mishnah Vov. Ma bein nozir lemitzeira el shezeh tarosa tlu biyomov kloim hanozir umitzeira tarosa tlu b'tiglachosai keshiyigale chametzeira v'yishlamo v'nishlamo tiglachas hashniya imafui tiglachas hashniya toham l'tamek kisheretz. And the Rambam not only does it over here, he says it's mafurish in the Pirush Mishnayis in Nazir Perek Vov Mishnah Vov. And worse than that, Pashtus of the Gemara says that, because you look at the Lashon of the Gemara and the pasuk that it quotes, it clearly is talking about tiglachas shniya. So Rab Chaim is turning, not only saying the Ram Mishnah Torah has turned against the Pirush Mishnah and also against Minyan Mitzvos, but also against the pashtus of what we perceive by looking at the Gemara. That's what the Gemara seems to say, and the pasuk of the Gemara quotes. All things said and done, assuming that the Rambam Mishnah Torah can turn the world upside down, interpret the Gemara Nozi differently, and go against Pirush Mishnayis and Sefer Hamitzvos, which is possible. The only thing that gets you a little nervous is the Gemara itself, but okay. There's a very important question, according to the Rambam. And this is really what I'm discussing. I'm not here talking about Chaim and Ramoshe and Hallel and the Rambam Nazir. If you're ready to accept, and this is the important question over here, if you're ready to accept Rab Chaim's premise that Tiglachas Hashniya is not part of the Metahir, but it's a Machshir in the Havos Korbanos, then you end up with a quagmire in the Rambam Mishnah Torah. Because you have to ask yourself one question. Very nice. The Rambam asks a question here in Minyan Hamitzvos. Why does he count Mitzera, Tiglachas of Mitzera, and the Korbanos Mechus Kippurim as two mitzvahs? And by Nazir, he counts Tiglachas and Havos Korbanos of Nazir as one mitzvah. So Chaim says, because, the Ram says, because in Nazir it's all one thing, it's all one tachlis. We'll see about that later. However, when it comes to Mitzera, the Tiglachas is a Metayer, and the Korbanos are finishing the Taira Mechus Kippur. The Tiglachas are Metayer from Tu B'Sheretz, and the Korbanos, they don't merge. The Tiglachas and the Tiglachas and the Korbanos don't merge together as one thing like by Nos. So since according to Chaim, the Tiglachas Shniya are not Metayer, but the Machshir for Havos Korbanos, in frame of reference of the postulates which the Rambam is setting up in Kufiyat Aleph, you don't have to agree with the data that the Rambam has, but the basic postulates of whether it's two mitzvah or one mitzvah, whether there's a relationship between the Tiglachas and the Korbanos or not. In Nazir, where they merge together, they're one mitzvah, and in Mitzvah, he says they're two separate things. One's a Metayah from Sheretz, and it has nothing to do with the Korbanos. It's for the Korbanos, a separate mitzvah. But if the premise that Rab Chaim suggests that the Tiglachas Shniya are machshir, the Korbanos and Mechus Kippurim, nothing to do with the Tahara, the separate Tahara from Sheretz, that's with the Tefillah. So then you have a question. Taking all the postulates the Rambam has set off in Kufiyat Aleph, forgetting about the data. Tiglachas Mitzera cannot be a separate mitzvah, but should be one mitzvah with the Korbanos Mechus Kippurim. Whether they merge together like by Nazir, or it's only a machshir, and being a machshir, the Ram says in Shiur that it's not even b'chlal to do with Minyan Hamitzvos. So how does the Rambam in Mishnah Torah quote a separate mitzvah in Minyan Hamitzvos called Tiglachas Mitzvah? And you don't have another option. So let's flip it and say that Tiglachas Rishona is the separate mitzvah. But since the Tiglachas Mitzera Rishona is only Metayer, it should merge together with Tzipurim, as the Rambam says in Shiur Aleph. So Lamaisa, we have no way of working out the Rambam in the frame of reference of Chaim learns in Mishnah Torah that there should be understand independently the Rambam's Minyan Hamitzvos in Mishnah Torah. In fact, there are a whole slew of Achronim. The Kesef Mishnah in Perek Yud Aleph of Tumas Saras Alochadal, the questions the Rambam says Eino Ma'akiv, the gifts that we have, they claim it's a Torah Sefer. There's a Mishnah Melech in Hilchos Naziris, Perek Ches Halacha Vav, Achastei David, Chazanish, and others. But the problem from our vantage is, how is it possible to say that Tiglach HaShniya has absolutely nothing to do with Tyrus HaMitzvah and still have it as a separate mitzvah? That's point number one. I thought it's a very interesting question. I didn't want to skip it. Number two, if you read the Rambam Kuf Yud Aleph, it's very clear that there's a relationship, almost identity, between Tiglachas and Havos Kabonis of a Nazir. And Ram says like this. Says like this. However, Tachlis Havos Kabonosov. Okay. He said, Fakodem Lon, he says over here. Excuse me, it's right over here. Avo, he says, V'shom Nisboye. V'shom Nisboye, Shehanozir Eino Mechusik Kapora. Avo, Hama'asahu Bichloloi, the conglomerate of the Tiglachas and the Havos Karbonos, Kloima Hagiluach V'Havos Korban, Yatiru Lo Shtias Yayin. So it means the Het Yayin is not from the Giluach and not from the Havos Karbonos, but from the conglomerate. V'lo yaspik mehem o echod bilti o acher. Aval Giluach niksha b'korban, v'korban b'giluach. They're pasted together. They're one entity. Together, you get the tachlis, and that's the heter. Who shiyutu lo advoim shahoyu asurim olo b'mei haniziris. The shtias yayin tumas mes. Ubishishim in the ziris perik vov mishnah yud omru gilach ala zevach v'nimsa posel tiglachas psula. If the zevach is posel, tiglachas is posel. Uzvochav loy ololoy. So he says, Uzvochav loy ololoy, right? So he's megaleach on tiglachas psula, gilach ala zevach nibsa posel, tiglachas psula. Uzvochav loy ololoy, because the zevach l'cho is posel, nibsa posel, right? Tiglachas psula. Gilach ala zevach v'nimsa posel, the zevach, tiglachas psula. Uzvochav loy ololoy, because they're psula. Hine his boy lecho ke tiglachas hi mitnai hazevach vazevach mitnoeho. It's the relationship is a reversible relationship. The tiglachas is a tnai in the zevach, and the zevach is tnai tiglachas. They merge together as one unit. That's what he's saying. Ubetesefta, his boy, we don't have it in Sefer. The Gemara quotes it in the Ram quotes it in Pirush Mishnah, Perek Yud, Perek Vov, Mishnah Yud. It's a Bryce in Nozit, Tes Vov and Aleph. His boy Gam Kein Nozik Kol Yomov, Osle Galech Lishtos Yayin, Litam Lemesim, Achi Asa Maisa. Hahu Kol Kuloi, Hu Tiglachas Ta of Kmoshi his boy. Vushi is galach pesach. So you need osig aleich lishtos yayin tameis achias amaisa hu kulot hu tiglachas hamitzvos. So he says, so you get the impression they all merge together. It's one thing. However, the Ram Mishnah Torah clearly paskins that with Havos Karbonis by itself, there's a het nazir. So comes Rab Nis in Ma'aseh Nisa of Abban Rambam in a tshuva to Neil Abavli. He says like this: the Omruzal ki zeh hama'aseh b'shleimusay v'otzloima tiglachas v'havos korban yatish tiesayayim. It's both together. Any Yudea im sova zeh sasvo v'chozimeno b'achibo. That's what I would have said. Oh, hoy lo yezen nusach asher lo yadanu leva'ava. Oh, zulosai. So it's interesting that Rambam is ready to say that he doesn't know what the nusach Ram. I guess he doesn't have Ram's. I don't know exactly what it means. Mashinirli v'zeh hu lo kivin b'zeis haraya lelamed hadin b'ma yatesh ties yayin hayayin l'nozir or b'ma yesel b'chtei shik shalom ki poskes vo dechuya. That's true. But the Rambam says because one is a Tanai and the other. The im cholkoi al zeh atano le cholko olov leimo ki hagiluach eno hechach la'asoisai oy leimo ki yesh le tachlis acher hayotzu meno. It's not that it's not part of the mitzvah. Ach leimo ki heta noifo koydem giluach, because the heta is independent of the kiyuma mitzvah. Vagiluach hi min shoi mitzvah ve'eno makev. That's what he says. I don't see this in the Rambam. It's very difficult to say shoi mitzvah ve'eno makev and say that the zevach is a t'nai of the giluach, and the giluach is a t'nai of the zevach. That's not the lashon shoi mitzvah. So I'm a little bit confused, but that's what I wanted to point out to you. And that's what we have. Okay. Now, next. I want to move to Kuf Yud Daled. I apologize that I didn't discuss in contrast, but I don't think discuss about Heka Mitzvah and the Ram Mishnah Torah without going back and talking about here will be of use. So let's move on to Kuf Yud Daled. Hamitzvos ha'arba esrei v'umeya. Ma shehoreseinu hatera. This is al tashriya lo shrana. It's a shrana. Bedin elke odom. It's a din. So the mitzvah here is the din, the same way the Ram and the dinim in Mitzvos Aseh, and suggests and talks about our forest the dolim, and he says kol mokum shtashmi eini. There is a din. The mitzvah is ladun, and he says afterwards that all mitzvahs tuma are also a din. Elkei odom is also a din. And that's why the Ram says in the Protei Mitzvah, ladun be'elkei odom kasher mefurish b'Torah v'zehu din elkei odom. And then also in Hilchos Eilchim v'Charamim, Perek Aleph Halacha Beis, Mitzvos Aseh Lodun B'Dinei Eilchim Kasher Mefurish B'Torah. So it's again Lodun B'Dinei Eilchim. It means to do according to the parasha. In Minyan HaMitzvah Kotze, he says, Liois marich adam noisei dom maksum b'parsha. Shenema ki yafli ned. He doesn't say that it's a din, but that's not a problem because if you study the Rambam in Minyan HaKotzer, he does many times, he says the mitzvah is lihiois, and it really is a paraphrase of a din. I assume what he means, Liyos, is a matzav, that it's a state, and he learned that a din is a state, because he does the same thing also in all the mitzvahs tumah. Listen to it here. Sadi Vov, which that's the din of Tumas Nevela. Leo is called the game of the Vela Tome. Sheneva Kiyomus min on the Vela. Sadi Zion. Leo is Shmona Shrotzim Etam. Sheneva Zela Chayva Tome. Sadi Ches. Leo is Achila Mistamen. Again and again and again. Now, so we have this. The mitzvah is the din, and Leo is min akotze is also really means the din, but that's the way he formulates it, min akotze. And the mitzvah is ladun, to do according to the Torah, the dinei Torah. Now, what is this din? The Rambam min akotze is explains it a little, because he says his lush is like this. He says, Liyos ma'arich Adam, the person who made the neder, the ma'arich Adam, noising dom maktsuv beparsha. The mitzvah is that the ma'arich, on whatever is nerach through his chiyuv, your chiyuv should be adjusted according to the parasha, and it's incumbent upon him to give the money. That's what he says. Liyos marich odem noising dom maksum b'parasha. However, if you look carefully over here, there's nothing about the haflah. If you know Eichin, in Elkei Odom is a haflah. There's no mention at all. Neither here, nor in the Minyan HaKotzer, anything about haflah. So the Rambam in Mishnah Torah does talk about haflah, but does something very interesting. The Rambam starts off in Perek Aleph of Hilchos Eichin, Halacha Aleph. Or Eichin, he neder michlal neder hektish. And Eichin is a very peculiar type of neder. It's called neder hektish. It's not neder yisrael. Shenema ish ki yafli neder be'er kchol nefosh l'Hashem. Lefika chayov maleim mishum ba'yachal dvoroi. V'lo yis'acher v'shalmoi. Umishum koch yoytzu b'piv yaseh. Is all nidre hektish. But the Rambam was very careful. That's halacha aleph. Then, in halacha beis, he writes, Mitzvos Aseh lo dun b'dinei eichin kasher mefurish b'Torah. So Rabbi say, I want to suggest the following. The Rambam B'Tachas HaDikduk is makdim halacha aleph, the discussion in nidrei hektish of Eichin to halacha beis. It is true that Elkei Odom is a neder, and it's nidrei hektish, and has all the din of nidrei hektish. It has a love about tacher, bal yachel, chol yotzi piv yaseh. Very nice. But the peculiar mitzvah of Eichin has nothing to do with those dinim of nidrei hektish. It's because there's a chiyuv on him because of the neder, but there's a chiyuv, and the chiyuv to gauge the chiyuv in accordance with the parasha in the Torah and discharge your chiyuv, that's mitzvah Eichin. It is true that if you're Mekayim it also, you're Mekayim Cholet to be Piv Yaseh. But there's a separate din HaTorah of Elkei Odom, and that's halacha beis and onwards. Now, the Ram continues. Vuhu Mi kimishi yoima elki olai o erich ploni olai. Elki olai, he's the ma'arich and the ne'erach, and erich ploni olai, he's ma'arich a third party. Now, the gisa that we have over here in Ibn Tibin is almost impossible to read. Im hoye zocha yifra kach, vim hoye nekeva tipor kach. Tipora is a woman is giving money. What are we changing over here? The nerach or the ma'arich? L'cheir Pash the Ram is talking about changing the nerach. That if the nerach is a zocha, you have to pay kach for kach. And if the nerach is the keva, you have to pay a different. But the woman's not paying anything, and she's a nerach. In fact, you see over here, the text is like this in Kapach. Kapach's text like this: Im hoye zocho, the nerach noisen kach. Im hoye send the keva noisen kach. It's the same person giving, and l'chor that's the proper gisa. Now he goes like this. So it goes, first of all, it depends upon zocho and the keva, and then ulefi hashonim into age in the parasha, kamo shebo b'kosuv. And it's completely independent of how healthy and or decrepit or the nerach is. That's Ram Perek Al Ches. Echra Marich es Ayofa Abori. Echra Marich es Akeo. V'achrile afilu hoya hanerach mukeshchin oy sumo oy dinem v'yesh loy boy kol mum noising the fishon of Kmosh Kosovater. And the Gama Pirush Mishnayis says that it doesn't depend upon the matzav of the nerach. And that l'chayra is what's going on over here. Okay. Now, Ram Pirush, our Mishnah is in Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph. Ein mashgichin al matzav hanerach ela shona bilvad. Now, then it continues, ulefi inyan hama'arich. That is Ibn Tibin. Kapach is ulefi matzav hama'arich. And the interesting thing is the Arabic word ches aleph lamed over here in Minyan Hamitzvos, and in Pirush Mishnayis in Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph are the same. It means matzav, but it has to be interpreted in context. When you're talking about matzav of the nerach, you're talking about his worth in terms of ever nikah v'shuk. But the din is erchin don't depend upon ever nikah v'shuk, but erchin depend upon the money which is kotzav b'teira. That's the chal in the matzav in the Mishnah. Here in Minyan Hamitzvos, we're talking about the matzav of the ma'arich. And what it means is the Torah has a separate dinim of heseg yad. And if he doesn't have the money to pay up the erchin, if he has a shekel, a seller, he able to pat himself with heseg yad. If he doesn't have it, when he becomes rich, he has to pay up. It's the same word of matzav, but it means different things in its context. So l'chera, what is the Rambam being marich over here? When he says zocho or nekeva or shonim or inyan ha'marich, matzav ha'marich, And he says, "V'omrei ish kiyafli neder nevde be'elchon nefoshes." I would say that the Rambam is saying that there are many fikr, there are many different possible ways that this mitzvah is miskayemis. There's, depending upon the age, from 30 days to 5 years, to 20 years, to 60 years, and after 60, Zocho and the cave, you have many different fikr. And you have not only fikr in the evaluation of the nerach, k'fi ha'kotz b'Torah, you have fikr in how the marach pays. If he's Oshir, and he has Hesed, or he's not Oshir, he's an Oni with Hesed, or he's an Oni without Hesed, and all the different din of Matzav HaMarich. And this the Ram is trying to tell you that it's all one mitzvah. Interesting, you would have expected Rav Sadi going as Kedarka B'Kodesh that he counts fikr as separate mitzvahs. He would have had a lot of mitzvahs over here. And the interesting thing is, he does not count even one. There's no mitzvah of Elkei Adam, even one mitzvah in his minyan mitzvahs, at least that I found. Okay. Now, also interesting, the Ram says in the minyan chotzev, it's the mitzvahs to give, okay? Here he talks about piroin, okay? But it's paying up, correct? Who do you pay? Who do you pay? So the interesting thing over here is he doesn't say at all who you pay. He doesn't say it in the minyan kotzer. He doesn't say it here in minyan mitzvahs. And he has the following line in Mishnah Torah. He has like this. He says, I've just explained it before. He says that Elchin is stamon leberek habayis. Perek Aleph halacha Yud of Elchim, v'Elchim kulon v'adomim hakol stamon leberek habayis. So once you say stamon, it means that if you explicitly express that it should be to some other place, it could be. It's just if you don't say anything. I just have a simple question. If there would have been a din in the Torah that Elchin have to go to Berek Habayis, so if he'd make a t'nai and say this money should go to Mizbeach or something else, it's the Hamas na Mashakos Batera. And the Ram seems to say Staman the Berek Habayis, it wouldn't be a Master Mashakos Batera. So it means there's no din of Berek Habayis in the Mitzvos Elchin. And that's how the Rambam doesn't discuss it. He does not discuss it in Minyan Mitzvahs, and he doesn't discuss it in Minyan Kotzer. In Mishnah Torah, from the dinim, he can say that it's stamo like this, but you have the right to refer to something else. Okay? That is over here, Mitzvah Kuf Yudalet. Now Kuf Tesvov. Mitzvah Chomesh Esrei Umeya. He shetzivos sivsonu hatera. So I would have assumed that it should be the same. I would say Hosenu hatera, because you understand yourself that you look in the Arabic, it's al tashriya shrana. So it basically is a shrana, like the mitzvah before. So it should be the same translation, the same exact Arabic. You can't have two different translations. bedin elkei behemoth tmeya. There's not only a mitzvah of elkei adam, there's a mitzvah of elkei behemoth tmeya. The word erech is value. When we talk about elkei adam, the value is nikva by the Parshat Torah. The fact that it happens to be a neder of lahafli michsas nefoshes is just a coincidence, but the mitzvah is elkei adam. And here, the mitzvah is the din of elkei behemoth tmeya. In behemoth tmeya, the elkei habehemoth is the dmei pidyon. We're not sure over here. See, I'm not sure what happens because he continues. V'hu amrei v'hemid es habehemo lifnei hakoyin v'herich hakoyin oisa. That's hamodo v'harocha. Okay? And that's a peculiar din that the kohen is ma'arich the value of the behemoth. It's not k'moshe kosa b'teira. There's not a parsha how much a behemoth is worth, depending on how old it is, or whether it's zoch on the cave, or whatever it happens to be. But the kohen evaluates it, which is different than elkei adam. But there's also another peculiar din in the parsha, which we call hamod v'arocha. And besides that, the mitzvah is on the payday that he should give the money to hektish. Liyos in Bnei HaKotzer, liyos ma'arich behemoth tmeya noisein domer shenema vehemid es habehemoth v'chulei. Okay, now that's what we have. I could have assumed that there's something peculiar over here, not only that it's according to worth, but the din of Hamad Baruch. Now, let's now go back to this Lashon. Let's go back to this Lashon in Minyan HaKotzer. Lihiyos ma'arich. So again, he does lihiyos, as he did in all of them. That's a din. Lihiyos ma'arich behemo tmeya noisein domeho. So what's the subject of noisein? L'cheira ma'arich. Lihiyos ma'arich behemo tmeya noisein. It's not the ma'arich is Mr. X and the noisein is Mr. Y, but it's the ma'arich should be noisein. So we're very confused why the Rambam calls the Preda over here the ma'arich, unless it means the makdish. Liyah is makdish behemoth tmeya noisein domeo shneim behemoth es hakoyin. So it's very confusing how to read it. Because the kohen's the ma'arich. Maybe you could have imagined that maybe the makdish has a separate inyan that the Ba'al liftos habehemo. And Liyah is ma'arich behemoth tmeya noisein domeo. But the pasha, the cry, is that the Tosefos Chomesh of the Makdish is only T'nai but it's not because it says V'im is Moisel Chomish. The Lashon, the Parsha is like this. V'im kol behema tmeya asher yoku imenu korban Hashem, v'hemen es behema l'fnei hakoyin, v'herich hakoyin oisa, bein tov l'ra, u'bein tov bein ra. There's no fixed sum. Whatever its worth is, ke'ech hakoyin ken yiyeh. V'im gol yigoleno, v'im gol yigoleno. If the makdish is goyel, is koyde, v'yis chamishu alel kecha. But l'chayr, it's only that option. But if somebody else does it, you're not moisel chomish. Unless this is the only thing that's mentioned with Fuish B'Kra, the Hisof is chomish, therefore he learns. And if somebody else's point is not Mefurish, maybe that's right. I don't know. Now, Hamodah Baruch Rabbi is not as a mitzvah to make the behemoth stand. Hamodah Baruch means the pidyon is before the Mitzvos HaBehema. And the Ram says it's in Uchetz Eilchin, Perek Hey, Aloch Yud Beis, Yud Gimel. Kol hamakdish behema b'chayeha, bein tehira, bein tmeya, bein kochi berek abayis, bein kochi abayis, bein kochi mizbeach, shenofu ben mum, oy tmimo hui likorev, moshis boya, harit smicha hamoda bebezdin, shenemo behemed es habehema. And then he goes on and said that if the behemoth dies, you can't be poida. So what does he mean? That the Amod of Arocha is not a din that you require, you just need chai. Now, you have a problem here. What does the word tmeya mean, a behemoth tmeya? So look at it by itself, you assume it's a behemoth tmeya means a non-kosher animal, whether it's a chazi or a gomel or a rabbit or whatever you want. Here he says, and l'chayr, it certainly includes a behemoth tmeya. Well, it includes other things than that we have to know. He also says this lashon in the Minyan HaKotzel, liyos marach behemoth tmeya, noisig demel. So what's behemoth tmeya? So the Matiki Hashmua interpret this pasuk, which the Ram learns the mitzvah, Vehemed es a behemoth lifnei hakoyin, veherich hakoyin oisa. It refers to a behemoth tahira shehikdisha v'nafal boimum. It's a Gemara in it's a Gemara in Bechiris, a Gemara in Menachos Kuf Aleph and Aleph, Bechiris Lamed Zayin and Beis, Ram quotes in the Uchetz Eilchin Perek Hey Aloch Yud Aleph, Magdish Behemoth Tmeya Lemizbeach. And he says, "V'nofel boimum v'nifsala harizu nereches niftes ve'azeh nema v'imkol behemoth tmeya she'elokli v'kom Hashem ve'hemen es hakol lebehemoth." So it means it was a behemoth tehera, and there was nofel boimum. That's the Pirush Mekubal says. So I just want to say, not only the Ram is ready to say that a behemoth tmeya mamish, even the Pirush Mekubal says we're talking about behemoth tehera shenaf b'mamum, but even a behemoth tmima, where you find pidyon there also would be this mitzvah. And on one hand, the Pirush Makubal is telling you, it's a very strange thing, that Behema, Tehera, Shnofel Mum has pidyon in how you evaluate it. But on the other hand, this din, this mitzvah, the din of Elke, Behema Tmeya, is on all pidyon Behema. How do I know this? Because the Ram Perek Hey of Hilchos Eichin, Halacha Yud Bey, says like this. Kol hamakdish, behema b'chayeho, bein tehira, bein tmeya, bein kochi abayis, bein kochi mizbeach, bein kochi abayis, bein kochi mizbeach, shenofu ben mum, oin tmimo, horili korev, kmo sheizboya, harizu tzrich amoda, bebezdin, shneima vehemen es behema, lefikach imesa, ha-behema, okay, that's true, but he is completely independent. Tmima, Tehera, Tmeya, Tehera, it's all the same. Because the Din Amod of Arocha was formulated even Behema Tmima, the Berek Abayis. And Rabbi Isai, if that's correct, then I understand the Lashon of the Rambam in Pratei Mitzvos in the beginning of Hilchos Eichin, because he says, he doesn't say Din Elkei Behema Tmeya, he says Din Elkei Behema. That's what you'd expect, because it is true, the Pirush Makubal says, the Pasuk to tell you how you play the Kochi Mizbeach, Shenofu Boy Mum, but the din of Erchin, of the Erch Behema, applies to Tmima, to Tmeya, Tehera, Tmeya, across the board. And that's why he says Stam in Pratei Mitzvos. Next. Shall I start the next one? We'll see. Oh, kvar hizboru mishpatei mitzvazu. B'makoyim is a common concept to Mumila. That is the mitzvah of Elchei Behema Tmei or Elchei Behema. Mitzvah Kuf Tes Zayin. Now we're going to talk about Elchei Batim, and then we're going to talk about Elchei Sodus. So, there's no mitzvah of Elchei Metaltalin. And L'cheira, Elchei Metaltalin had the same din as Elchei Batim, and we'll see about it. But L'cheira, there's no mitzvah because there's no mefurish in Torah Shebiksav about Elchei Metaltalin. What's mefurish in Torah Shebiksav? You can imagine different mitzvahs. We'll still have to wait and have patience. The Kuf Yud Zayin, the Ram is going to ask why the 4 separate mitzvahs. Now, comes here in Hamitzvos Hashesh Esrei Umeya. He shetzivonu be'elkei batim. This I don't understand. The Ram over here, the Lashon is alamal elik amalna. So here we use the Lashon of a bona fide sivui. It is true also that lightning struck twice. He not only says it's an amal, but it doesn't say bedin elkei batim. But he says be'elkei batim. So it seems that it's a bona fide sivui. We don't know what it is, because it's v'ish ki yakdish is based on kodesh Hashem ve'ericho hakohen. So if he's makdish the behemoth tmei, there's also a behemoth as a behemoth fnei hakoyin ve'erech ha'isai. Why one? It's very clear the Ram is trying to do this because he does it twice. He first of all says an amalno and he leaves out the word din. However, in Minyan HaKotzer, first of all, in Prati Mitzvos, it's very clear, because in Prati Mitzvos he says, Din Erke Batim. Okay? So the Rambam is not being machalik. Okay? And then also, it's the same liyos as the other mitzvahs over here. So I'm not sure. He seems to be going out of his way and saying if a mitzvah say it's different because he does two things here. We have no clue for what and why he did it. Now, maybe the Ram held over here because he has a very strange lashon in Mishnah Torah, which we'll talk about Mitzvah later or next week. He says by Erke Batim, v'kreifen es haba'olim liftoach rishon v'adom leberek habayis. Kilu yemachriach. So because of that, it should be amal as opposed to the other. And but Mishnah Torah himself, he says the din. Now again, Rabbi San, there is a peculiar way of evaluating the dom behemo that has to be behem b'chayel. However, in Erke Batim, there's no peculiar way of evaluating the money. It's the same as all metaltalim. But there's a mitzvah of Erke Batim because only Batim of Furush but T'kra. Because the Ram says in Hilchos Erech v'Chalomim, Perik Hei Halacha Gimel, Hamakdish es beisai o es behema tmeya shelo o sham metaltal. Behema tmeya mentioned later as Hamod of Halacha o sham metaltalov harihei nerocha b'shavein bein toiv uvein ra. Mipoles hamakdish o ish o yosh o imois b'choimish v'koiven es abayim l'ftoich rishon v'adomim leberek habayis. So it doesn't make a difference. There's no difference between metaltalin and batim, but l'chayr the mitzvah is batim only because batim is a foolish bakor, and that's the pasuk. V'ish ki yaktish is beis al kodesh l'Hashem v'richo hakoyin bein tov u'bein ra kasher yaricho yisrael hakoyin ken yokum v'mamaktish yigal. Beisai as Beisai, v'yoyis l'chamish kesef elcha olav v'hoyeloi, and that's all it says. So there's no peculiar din of Elkei Batim. It's just the only peculiarity. It doesn't have the din of Elkei Behemo. There's no hamod. You don't require hamod of halacha. Now, next, the Minyan HaKotzer is like this: Lihiyos ma'arich beiso noisen ke'erech hakoyin. The ish kiyaktish is based on mashma that the mitzvah is on the balabayis bedafka. Liyos marich es beis oy. However, if you look at the pasuk is mashma only tonight. V'ima makdish yigel es beisav yoytzach hamisha o kesav elcha olav v'hoyaloi. On the other hand, it's a lashon of a tanai v'im, but the other case, if a different poder, not mention the Torah. So maybe that's the reason, but it's a very odd thing going on over here. Okay? Mitzvah Hashem will pick up next week, Bli Neder.